G'day and welcome to Gender Critiques. There's a few things that are not everybody knows about gender identity politics and the TRA movement, but that everybody really should. So let's just hop to it then. Number one, transsexual and transgender are not the same thing. So what a lot of people aren't aware of, but what the movement banks on them sort of assuming, much like myself before I became aware of the realities of this, is that when people are talking about trans women, they're assuming that they're transsexuals, that these are the people with genuinely have gender dysphoria who are doing everything they can to physically transition, including having the operations like genital reassignment surgery, etc. That's what people assume when they hear trans woman. The reality is, no. The trans umbrella has been broadened and expanded to cover and to include not only transsexual people, who will be about 0.001% of them, but it also now includes what we used to call transvestites, which are cross-dressers, men that cross-dress, the majority of whom would fall under the category of AGP, which is autogynephilia. It used to be called a sexual it used to be known as a sexual fetish, wherein the man basically gets off on the idea of himself as a woman. There's a doctor out there called Dr. Ray Blanchard, who has done extensive writing and research on this. He's like the world's premier knowledge or premier expert, etc., on all things gender dysphoria, because he's been treating it and working with it for 30 years, etc. The trans rights activists have in the past tried to have him silenced off Twitter and discredited. However, his work remains, and if you read it, you will see if you're familiar with this debate, you will see a whole lot of shit just dropping into place and making sense. As with everything else in my videos, I will put a link to that in the description. So just to quickly, before we move on, just to clarify, so a transsexual woman is not the same as a transgender woman, or rather a transgender woman does not always mean transsexual woman. In fact, that's rarely, that's the minority of the time. Most of the time, what it means is that a trans woman is someone or anyone who identifies as a woman, which means that they have a feeling in their head that discredits all of our womanhood and our physical experiences of 51% of the population. But that aside, if they feel like a woman because they, because they occasionally they feel like they might be, nurturing or submissive, that makes them a woman on their say-so. 85% of these trans women do not undergo any kind of genital reassignment surgery. They are intact male-bodied people. So that's intact male-bodied people being called trans women, and these are the ones that are getting radical feminists and, well, any person with any fucking an ounce of sense in their head, concern or giving a shit about the well-being of women and children too. That's what we have the issue with. So that was number one. Number two, with self-ID, there is no requirement whatsoever for any kind of transition in terms of medical, like any kind of hormone treatment, any kind of hormone therapy, any kind of genital reassignment, any kind of sexual genital surgery, pre-op, any kind of operative. There is absolutely no requirement anywhere for a trans woman, a man who's identifying as a woman, to have any of that. So if it's a trans woman, it does not mean that he's going to get his dick cut off. In fact, as I just said before, a really huge high percentage of the trans women do not. They are quite happily, they have everything intact, and they're quite happily fucking going to stay that way for the rest of their lives if they have any say about it. So don't be assuming that the trans woman, it means that they're pre-op or they're post-op or whatever. No, about 85% of them are no-op and going to stay that way. 3. In Scotland and in Canada right now, as we speak, police departments, etc., police are recording crime statistics based on gender identity as opposed to what it should be, which is biological sex. Now, what this means, and this is huge, is that when you consider that, say, of all like violent crime, like domestic violence or violence against women committed, right, or of all violence, anywhere committed, right, you're looking at about 90% of the perpetuators are male-bodied people, so they're men, right? Now, this really does come down to biological sex, yeah. So it's male, like violence against women or violence in general is a male problem. It's a male issue, yeah. Now, the reason we know this is because of the crime statistics and the way that, convictions, etc., have been recorded and reported, which is according to biological sex. Now, with this changing, with them, and they haven't done it like overtly or, or openly, they've just sneakily made these changes, and it's just that they've just started to do it without announcing it or anything, gone under the radar with this crime reporting. But what it means is that, crime reporting, the other thing you need to take into consideration is that, and I will put a link to the evidence to the source in the description, but that there is strong fucking evidence that suggests that transition does not have any impact on a person's pattern of violence. So what that means is, if a man has a history of rape and sexual assault, pedophilia, etc., like if he transitions and says he's a woman, he's still going to he's still going to be a rapist, he's still going to be a pedophile, he's still going to be a sexual assault, someone that commits sexual assault, etc. The transition itself, with him saying he's a woman, has absolutely fuck all effect on whether or not he is more or less violent. If he's already violent and he's already a fucking abuser and he's already a rapist, he's going to stay one. So him saying that he's a woman, right, all that's going to do is allow him to get imprisoned and incarcerated in a women's jail with female inmates. What has he got there? He's got fucking beautiful. He's got a fucking a buffet of victims who cannot get the fuck away from him. And if you think I'm lying about that, we'll just put a link to Karen White and the story there in the description under the heading for this point, which is, I think, number 3 or 4, I don't know, 3, whatever. So when you bear those in mind, now what you've got to take into consideration now is that, okay, so if we're trying to battle violence against women, we're trying to battle domestic violence, we're trying to address rape and sexual assault, etc., and basically eradicate that from happening in our society, because one would hope that my daughter could grow up and be able to walk the streets late at night without the fucking risk of getting murdered. We need to be able to map it accurately. So now, if the crime stats are being recorded and reported based on gender identity as opposed to biological sex, what we're going to see is a huge spike, and it's already happening, a huge spike in female crimes. Because I find that offensive on every single fucking level, including the fact that I'm a domestic violence survivor, and how are we going to fucking fight something if we can't even map it accurately? And once this, if this continues happening, if it comes into Australia, the fucking statistics after that, they're compromised. They're fucking bollocks. They're useless. So anyways, that's something really, really key, and you really need to bear that in mind. Number 4, we really need to know that you'll see with the trans rights lobbies and the trans rights propaganda, etc., that's being just bollocksed out everywhere and fucking regurgitated, repeated online and all that sort of shit, that you'll see a consistent fucking reference to the high rates of suicide, etc., within the trans community. So it's saying 42% of trans people have committed suicide. Rah, rah, rah. Okay, what you need to know is this: those fucking stats are bunk. They're bullshit. They're based largely on one study done by one university using 1,000 people. Only 27 of that 1,000 of whom are self-identified as trans. And the question that originally they've based all of these statistics and shit on, that they've used, that they're constantly throwing out there. The question was to these 27 people: have you ever considered self-harm or suicide? They're not basing those stats on actual deaths, because they don't exist. They're not basing those stats on people who have actually physically tried to commit suicide. They're basing those, or they're not basing those stats on a large group or even more than one conclusive study. They're basing it on 27 people in a group of 1,000 who self-identified as trans and had thought about or attempted it. Okay, now I don't know about anyone else. I'm a Gen X, so anyone that's fucking made it through to adulthood, through puberty, right, without having one of those thoughts, is doing really well, because I would dare say that the majority of us all, yeah, we've been there. I got diagnosed with BPD. I have actually attempted suicide in the past when I was a bit messed up. More than once. I know what it's like to be that fucked up. I know what it's like, and my heart goes out to anyone there. But the statistics they're throwing out are fucking bollocks. And I'll put links to the research and the sources that show that, and also to the original the original study that I'm referring to. So you can see how it's been misinterpreted and falsified, etc., by MERMAIDS, which is a huge transgender rights lobby in the UK, who are majorly influential on policy change. They're majorly influential within the education system, the governments over there, policy change within police departments, etc. But they're not experts. They are basically formed and consist of a bunch of parents with kids that were trans. You know, they're not an objective fucking group, to be honest, and there's been a lot of questions coming up about them repeatedly and referring to in conjunction with concerns about gatekeeping, etc., in terms of keeping children safe as well. So that's just another one, but I'll put another link to that in the description as well. Next point. Girls as young as 13 have been given double mastectomies in Canada. This has already happened. 13 girls as young as 13, and not just one, have been given double mastectomies to healthy breasts because they have identified as male. Now, with ROGD, which is rapid onset gender dysphoria, we actually have evidence that this is in fact a social contagion. We'll put the link to the Brown's University study that shows that. So basically, these young girls have been allowed to make life-altering decisions based on the feelings they had in their head when they're fucking teenagers. My God, are you serious? Anyway, and this is without fucking waiting to this is even without doing further research into whether or not it is a social contagion, which I believe it is, and a lot of the evidence strongly suggests it is. Not only that, but when the trans rights, when the TRA fucking propaganda and the gender identifarian fucking cult advocates, when they're all spouting their dogma at you and telling you blah blah blah, no, kids aren't being transitioned, kids aren't being put on hormone blockers and stuff like that. That's just TERF fucking scare TERF scare tactics and TERF scare fucking rhetoric. All right, yeah, well, okay, here's the thing, right? These kids have been put on puberty blockers to block puberty, and puberty is when you go from child into adolescence. Children are being put on puberty blockers. Otherwise, why would you bother blocking puberty? Yes, so actually, yes, kids are being put on fucking hormone treatment and puberty blockers, and they will say that there's no harmful effects and that these are fully reversible. No, bollocks. Links in the description to prove what I'm saying. The reality is that the long-term effects of some of these hormones, etc., are not known because the studies have not yet been done. Secondly, in a couple of cases, if the kids are given a combination of certain two of them, it can and has resulted in permanent sterilisation. And they are being given these two. There are kids out there who are being put on these two, so they're going to end up being infertile for life. There are some of the other negative effects of some of the hormones that these kids are being put on are low bone density, impaired muscle, emotional and mental development because of the blockers, as well as sterilisation and shit like that. So it's fairly major, and yes, it is happening to kids. So you need to be aware of that, and everything I'm saying, there's fucking links in the description to the evidence to back this shit up. The description, if you go to the title of the video underneath this, you just click on that little down arrow and boom, and that's where you'll find I've put all the links to everything I'm fucking saying in this video. Next, the gender identity politics and the TRA movement are trying to push an ideology that maintains that biological sex is on a spectrum and is subject to interpretation, whereas gender identity is based on a tangible reality. So the feeling in the head of someone is meant to be something that's absolutely fucking tangible, absolutely, indisputable and real, right? Whereas the fact that the fact that humanity is a sexually dimorphic species is apparently fucking up to interpretation. It's on a spectrum, okay? They will use the intersex argument, despite the fact that the intersex community and representatives from therein have repeatedly asked them to stop using them as some sort of pawn in their in their dogma, in their rhetoric. They will continue to use intersex as some kind of fucking gotcha to say that humans aren't sexually dysmorphic, despite the fact that the evidence is out there that clearly disproves this and like shows it up for being the bollocks that it is. They will use clownfish as some kind of proof that humans aren't sexually dysmorphic, because somewhere out there there's a little fucking fish that is some sort of hermaphrodite or some shit, right? Apparently that's meant to prove that we're not just, generally divided into male and female, and that's not how we, reproduce, yada yada. They will use fungus with fucking supposedly 4,000 gender identities, but if you read the actual article that one's based on, they do acknowledge his biological sex. So a lot of those fucking idiots, as usual, have not done their research. Basically, it's all a load of bollocks. They don't have the evidence to back it up. And when you ask for the evidence to back it up or start questioning, you will get called a bigot, you'll get called a TERF, and you'll get blocked and added to TERF blocker lists. Okay. Next one, and this is probably the last one. What a lot of people don't realise is this. Most of the academics, most of the medical practitioners, most of the medical and psychological experts, most of the people who educational experts, etc., who have been critical openly of gender identity politics, have ended up being silenced, have ended up being doxxed, or have ended up losing their jobs. Now, there are going to be links in the description to who's really running this movement, but let me tell you this, like if you look up Jennifer Pritzker, he is a fucking billionaire trans woman, he transitioned after he'd fathered like 6 kids and shit, then decided he wanted to wear dresses to get his jollies off the rest of his life, but he's got billions of dollars. So what he's done is to back this whole fucking, fetish of his own up. He's decided to fucking fund a lot of the movement. There's not just him, there's a few of them. Now he's got his fingers in Harvard alumni. He's got his fingers in a whole lot of fucking big pharma investments, who are, fucking coincidentally are the ones making the fucking puberty blockers and hormones, etc. He's got his fingers in a lot of pies, and yeah, this movement is not, it's an ASTROTURF movement, mate. It's not a grassroots one. It's all a fucking front. Okay, so that's it for now. I hope that these things will get you thinking. If you don't believe me, by all means, please, the links are all in the description. Read them, have a look, make up your own fucking mind. You don't have to agree with me if you don't think the evidence is solid. That's fine, but just fucking read it, for God's sakes. Just look at both sides before you make that call. Okay? Thank you for watching. I'm Pia from Gender Critiques. Hello and welcome to all my awesome new subscribers. You guys fucking rock, and see you next time.